Hello, hello. This is Chris, and this week on Books, I am bringing you The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. So if you've never read this book, this is going to be a great digest of what is possible when you consider the practice of love as an art. What does that mean? How do you practice it? How do you get good at it? These are all the questions that we're going to answer, that I'm going to answer with you. And by the end of this episode, you will understand in two parts. The first being the theory of love. So what Erich Fromm has broken down with the four elements that are common to love. This is a really cool checklist that I come back to a lot. It's something I think about in different relationships. Not only what he refers to as erotic, which is maybe something I'd say like romantic or boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, but also the various types of relationships with the mother, relationships of the love of brothers. We'll go into all that. So that's the theory of love, and that's what we're going to knock off in the first half of this. The second part, which will be a little bit of a shorter part, will be the practice of love. And then we will break down, I'll bring to you the requirements that Erich Fromm says that need to be practiced in order to master love as an art. So that's what's coming up. I hope you enjoy this. If you've never read it, if you have read it, this will be a great refresher for you. And by the end of this, I hope you have some vocabulary and perspective that Erich Fromm, from back in 1956, the great renowned psychologist and social philosopher, German dude, will bring you 60 years later his views on love. All right, enjoy this. Is love an art? Erich Fromm writes on page 1. Let me read to you here. Is love an art? Well, if so, it requires knowledge and effort. Or is love a pleasant sensation? Something that someone falls into by chance? Or if you're lucky. So this book is based on the premise that, yes, love is an art. Well, what does he mean by an art? Here on page 5, he writes, the first step to take is to become aware that love is an art, just as living is an art. If we want to learn how to love, we must proceed in the same way, that if you were to become an artist of music or painting or carpentry or the art of medicine or engineering. All of these are arts. So what does that mean? What are the necessary steps in creating art? So he breaks it down. The process of learning art. The process of learning an art can be divided into two parts. 1, the master of the theory, and 2, the master of the practice. So by this he means if I want to become skilled in the art of medicine, like an amazing doctor, I must know the facts about the human body and anatomy, the various diseases. First, you study. But with that, it's not enough. That's just the theoretical knowledge. And by no means are you a doctor if you just go to med school. You have to practice it. So to become a master requires a great deal of practice until eventually at some point, the theoretical knowledge, all the stuff you learned in school and all the stuff that you've read and thought about, gets expressed in the results of your practice. And over time, the theory and the practice blend into an intuition. This is the essence of mastery of an art, the intuition that you get over time by putting theory and practice together. And Fromm looks at this and says, love is an art. If love is an art, what is the theory and what is the practice? And this is the book that he's writing and that you are listening to right now. Oh, and there is one more thing, a third factor necessary to mastering any art. And that is, if you're going to be a master of something, you have to make it your ultimate concern. You have to put time into it. This holds true for becoming a musician or a doctor, whatever, and it's true for love too. If love is relegated to something that you put on the side burner or something that you don't think about, that you don't hold as to be as important as success or money or power, all of this stuff that Fromm definitely in the 50s when he was writing this had somewhat of a anger, of a he looked at American society and saw that we were putting too much of our attention in books like How to Win Friends and Money by Dale Carnegie, and not enough time into enjoying and expressing this art of love. He saw us as being distracted. So he comes to this idea of, look, I'm going to give you the theory and the practice, but it's worth nothing if you don't make this your concern. So if by the end of digesting this, you understand this, but don't take the time to practice it, it's worthless. And he sets that straight before he gives you any theory. So I'm just setting that straight. I'm doing the job of the Fromm for you right now and letting you know that he's putting his foot down on where this stands. By this, he's saying love is something that you have to give. In order to make love an art, it's primarily an activity of giving and not just receiving. And he's making a comparison or a contrast here, really, between the ways that we look for drugs and sex and conformity and our work, and we give to that. Yet when it comes time to love, we expect it as, oh, I'm lovable. Oh, I need love, or I'm in love, or I'm out of love. But it's rarely an action verb that we look at. And to see it as an art is to see it as something that we're actively involved in. He uses this term orgiastic in kind of like a sociological way to refer to any peak emotional intensity. So by that, he's using it to mean drugs, alcohol, not just sex, but including sex. Any kind of state where you go into a trance, where the outside world disappears and where you can solve this problem of separateness. So he says, yeah, these work. These will solve that problem, but they're fleeting because slowly the anxiety will come back, and then you just need to repeat these rituals. So he's saying nope, they're not going to be enough to solve your problem of separateness. It's the kind of separation that's biblical. It's the kind of separation that Jung and Freud and Ernest Becker in The Denial of Death examine. It's the kind of separation that's in our music. Artists like Iron and Wine, where Sam Bean writes, "One of us will die first. One will spread our lover's ashes around the yard." Knowing that this is coming and knowing that we are separate and alone with our lovers and our mothers, and yet having this space and having to fill it. Whoa, I know we're getting dark here, but this is the way he sets it up. He makes this space, he makes this darkness, this existential dilemma that we're all faced with. And then he brings us to the awareness of our separation, and that as being the source of our anxiety. He writes, being separate means being cut off, and it feels as though we're helpless. We have shame, we have fear, we have guilt. So how do we overcome this problem of human existence? Well, first, Fromm addresses three ways that we have been trying to overcome this problem of separation and of our awareness. The first is what he refers to as orgiastic states, like an orgy. So stepping back, what he's doing here is, in his theory of love, he's saying there is a theory of love, and it is that love is the cure to our separateness. And he's giving three examples, the first being the situation of orgiastic pleasures, is saying, yep, that's what you think it is, but it's not. The second and third, I'll give those to you quickly. The second one is the idea that we want to conform as humans in a way to relieve this anxiety of separateness. So he says we want to conform to a much higher degree than we're forced to conform as human beings. By conform, he means conforming to church, government, work, communities, and yet he believes that we're overworking and that we're finding some kind of false salvation in the way that we overwork, the routineness of our work as a way to pacify our separateness, as a way to disguise that we have this separateness inside of us. So conformity is the second way, this kind of conformity. And it works, but it's temporary, as well as the third way. Creativity is the third way. Through our creative activity, we, the worker, become one. We unite with this process of creation in life and dedicate ourselves to it. And he says this third way of solving the separateness, it also works, but all three of these ways, they fall short. They fall short of love. And so here he just raises the importance of love. Now, for me, I can relate to these three examples of the ways that, that I try to, mask this kind of separateness in my life. And I could really relate to this quote here on page 20, where he says that we are driven by this deep insecurities of loneliness at times, and then fill these with work and become a slave for the passion of work. I mean, I understand that is a way to try to make myself feel connected and feel important and feel creative. I understand that. He brings up this argument then that love is the only long-lasting way, that it's been around, that humanity could not exist for a day without it, that love is the thing which holds us all together. And I think he could go a little bit deeper into his argument there, but I'm willing to just, go with him and believe, yes, this is something that we have given ourselves as human beings and existence to for so many years. So I like the way he sets it up. He could have went a little deeper for my taste, but that's his premise. He says all of these other things, yes, they work with their distractions. However, love can bring you freedom from this anxiety. So how do you do that? Love is an activity, not a passive effect, he writes. Your love is an activity, not a passive effect. All right, so that brings me to one of my favorite parts of the book, where Erich Fromm lists the 4 elements or the 4 ways that you can actively give love. I'm going to go through the 4 of those now. Starting with the quote, "Love is the active concern for life and the growth of that which we love." I'll read it again. Love is the active concern for the life and growth of that which we love. Page 25. So it's in this part of the theory of love that Eric writes, so beyond the elements of giving, the active character of love becomes evident in the fact that it always implies certain basic elements common to all forms of love. So here's the 4. These 4 are care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. I'm going to break down each one of those for you now, a la the way that I read Cards Against Humanity cards. Follow me here. So, an element of love. Care. Okay, care is an element of love. So, what does that mean? Care means caring for someone. You have to care for someone in order to love them. So, if a woman told you, hey, I love flowers, and then you saw this woman who loves flowers forgetting to water the flowers or stepping on the flowers, you wouldn't really believe that she cared for them, but you wouldn't really believe her when she said she loved flowers. That's what care is. That's number 1. Number 2, an element of love, responsibility. So to be responsible, the word itself means to be able and ready to respond, responsibility. So if you're responsible for someone, that is a voluntary act. That is an element of love. And that is the second of the 4 in this checklist for the elements of love. An element of love, respect. Respect is number 3. Respect builds on the last one. Number 2 is responsibility, remember? So responsibility, the problem with responsibility in and of itself is that just to be responsible could deteriorate into being dominant over someone or possessive. You're responsible, like you own them. So it's this third quality, this respect that allows you to see this person as they are, to be aware of his or her unique individuality of who this person is, and to have concern over this person as they grow and unfold. So this respect is the third one. So now we have, the first was care, the second was responsible, the third is respect, and that brings us to the fourth, an element of love, knowledge. You have to know the person you love. You have to have a knowledge of them, because, respect alone, right? If you respect someone without knowing them, that doesn't even make any sense. And to have care and responsibility without knowing the person, well, then what are you caring for and what are you responsible for? You have to know them, otherwise you're blindly following something. So knowledge is the fourth one. And that brings this final layer, this fourth layer, to an active, what I see as a checklist in a way. Fromm gives us this checklist of these 4 elements of active loving.
She says, wake up, it's no use pretending. I'll keep stealing, breathing her. Birds are leaving over autumn's ending. One of us will die inside these arms. Eyes wide open, naked as we came. One will spread our ashes round the yard.
Now moving to the various types of love. This is set up in the theory of love. And the first one is the love between a parent and a child. Fromm writes, "The infant, at the moment of birth, would feel the fear of dying if a gracious fate did not preserve it from any awareness of the anxiety involved in the separation from mother and from intrauterine existence. Even after being born, the infant is hardly different from what it was before birth. It cannot recognize objects. It is not yet aware of itself and of the world as being outside of itself." Over the next 15 to 20 pages, Fromm outlines in detail the various types of love, starting with motherly love. Motherly love, he says, is love for the helpless, which is the child, and it's an unconditional love. And this is interesting because then he goes to define fatherly love as what he believes is a conditional love. For fatherly love, it's different because with fatherly love, you say, I love you because you fulfill my expectations, because you do your duty, because you are like me, is what he writes. He goes on to compare and contrast between brotherly love. That's the love between equals. Yet, as equals, we are not equal, he writes, and goes into the differences there. Erotic love, self-love, love of God, all the various types of love that we can take into consideration and begin to think actively about how to actively participate in these kinds of loves in our life. The practice of love. This is chapter 4, around page 100. It ends the book off. So the practice of love. I'll read for you now. Having dealt with the theoretical aspect of the art of loving, we now are confronted with a much more difficult problem, that of the practice of the art of loving. Can anything be learned about the practice of art except by practicing it? The difficulty of the problem is enhanced by the fact that most people today, hence many readers of this book, expect to be given prescriptions of how to do it yourself. And that means, in our case, to be taught how to love. I'm afraid that anyone who approaches this last chapter in that spirit will be gravely disappointed, because to love is a personal experience. What I believe Fromm is saying here is that he can't give you the prescription that is going to make love like 100% perfect in your life. Just as if, I was trying to teach you how to play music, I could give you some pointers, but anything I say has to be digested by you, applied to your own life, and then made your own. I think that's all he's really trying to do, as well as somewhat separate himself from a lot of the books in the 50s that were coming out with quick fixes to get ahead in life. This is not that, is what he's saying. With that kind of setup, he still does believe, yes, you need to practice love. And so instead of giving you, the top 10 listicles of his time, he just breaks down a few general requirements of how we can approach love. So he's basically like, these are some general principles that you can start to follow, but not a panacea. Number 1. So in order to practice an art, you must have discipline. And I spoke about this briefly in the beginning when I was saying, if you want to take love as seriously as we take art seriously, it needs to be of the utmost importance. And part of that means having discipline for it. So think about love in your life. love that you want to cultivate, love that you want to become a master at, and ask yourself, do you only put yourself in that situation of becoming a master of that love when it's convenient, when you're in the mood? Do you avoid having hard conversations? Do you, take the easy way out? Do you go into routine with your love? This is what Fromm is saying you need to stand up for and go against. You need to say, no, I'm going to put discipline into learning this with all the joy and pain that comes with love. I'm going to put some time on the calendar, so to speak. So discipline is part of the practice of love. Number 2, concentration. In order to practice love, you need to focus. He writes, you may do many things at once. You may read, listen to the radio, talk, smoke, eat, drink. Wow, really nothing has changed in 60 years. He's saying if you want to do this, if you want to practice love, you need to concentrate and really give it your all, is really the kind of pep speech he's giving here. And number 3, if you want to practice and eventually master love, you need to have patience. Anyone who's tried to learn or master an art knows that patience is necessary if you want to achieve anything. So love takes patience.
Come with me, my love, to the sea of love. I wanna tell you how much I love you.
All right. Thanks for listening to On Books. Just some closing thoughts here on the art of loving. So I hope you've been inspired to think about love as more than just a passive activity, but as something that you can treat as an art, something that you can learn by reading books, by talking to people, by having mentors, by checking in with your loved one. By doing all of this and by practicing it, by putting the time in, by having the hard conversations, by having patience. That's really what this book's all about. If you want to dive deeper into it, I recommend you pick it up. It is a little book, 130 pages, and goes way more poetically into some of these concepts. I will highlight, so the 4 elements of active love. I use that in my own life as somewhat of a barometer to ask myself, do I love this thing? Am I actively giving myself enough to this person in the moment? Am I caring? Am I responsible? Am I acting respectful? Do I know enough about this person, or is this just infatuation? So for me, that has always been a helpful checklist of sorts to have in the back of my head. I have a weird mnemonic for remembering it. It's kind of silly, but because the letters are RRCK, so I just think of it's kind of like Rick and Morty or something, but the I is an R. I don't know if that helps you, but it's good to keep in the back of my head. RRCK, so like Rick. It works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. I have 2 closing quotes here from the book that I want to share with you. At the end of the book, as we're understanding this practice of love, Eric Fromm writes, and this is about finding great examples in our life to inspire us. He writes, "There are many people who have never seen a loving person, or a person with integrity, or courage, or concentration. It is quite obvious that in order to be sensitive to oneself, one has to have an image of complete, healthy human functioning." I really love that quote. If you listen to the previous episode of my interview with Neil Strauss, that came up just as a way to think about the examples that we have in our lives and how those examples of what a good, hardworking person is, what success means. A lot of times we take these examples from around us and form our own realities in our heads. I know I do that. I know that for the longest time, I had an image of what love meant in my head. And it wasn't until I traveled a bit, until I got, away from, just my little nucleus where I grew up, New Jersey, to really experience different kinds of loves and different kinds of realities and really challenge my way of thinking. So this is Fromm's idea in practicing his way of practicing is saying, look for good examples. A lot of us may not have them, and this can really be an inspiration for finding that, for finding a better example of love to reach further. And I'm constantly doing that now. I mean, it'll happen until I'm dead. I think there's just this search and this constant growth of looking for examples in my life to check in and to meditate on that. So I love that quote. And the final quote, which really struck me, especially in this rereading, because I just reread the book before doing the podcast. The quote is just about narcissism, so self-love in a way. And he writes on page 109, "The main condition for achievement of love is the overcoming of one's narcissism." That one really struck me this time. I think because sometimes when we talk about overcoming narcissism, to me it means getting myself out of the way of myself. I tend to self-sabotage loving relationships a lot of times, or have in the past. And because there's always this kind of, voice in my head listening and judging and trying to understand and do so many things at once, that I get out of sync with the practice of love, with the discipline, with putting in time for it. And I let my own self-importance get in the way, is really what I'm trying to say. So yeah, there's something about this line, just the main condition for achievement of love is the overcoming of one's narcissism. Just think about that. Think about, do you love yourself more? Does your self-love get in the way? Does your apathy or greed or any of that stop you from loving? Because love, as Eric Fromm has taught us here, is an active word, a verb, an action that you perform, not something that you wait around for, not something that you do on the side. But if you want to master love, it's giving up, it's dying inside a little bit, like in a positive way of letting yourself not be first, by letting yourself allow room for someone else, for perhaps many people, to love many people in life. Those are my musings. Those are my thoughts on that. Something that I wrote down on a little sticky pad here and just going to keep around for this week to keep thinking about. And I encourage you to find some quotes from this and do the same. If you're looking for some quotes from the book, if you're looking for more information, it is on the site on-books.com. That's where you can find the book notes. You can find many other books that we've talked about, everything from Thinking Fast and Slow to Mating in Captivity, Sex at Dawn, Letters to a Young Poet. I got tons of books up there. You can write me if you would like to at chris@on-books.com. Just tell me what you're thinking. Tell me if you like the podcast. Tell me what's on your mind. You can request books. That's chris@on-books.com. I am on Twitter @onbooksshow. I'm on Facebook, facebook.com, onbooksshow. If you subscribe to those, as well as iTunes, On Books, you'll get the episodes soon, as soon as possible. It will come to you because that's how the internet works, and it's amazing. So please subscribe. Please tell a friend or two. Please write me and let me know what you're thinking. I hope you enjoyed this book. I hope you read it. If you find any other books about love, the theory of love, the practice of love that you want to share, you can post them in the comments on the website. I'm really just so excited to share this book with you and to get some feedback on if this resonates with you and ways that you've learned to understand and practice love. All right, that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Thanks so much for listening.